Chapter 4. This is where the author discusses how do we actually get a website up so we can do some e-commerce? What are the things that are involved in doing that? And what I like about the approach that the authors have done on this is they do talk about the planning and the strategy that goes in before you do this. That's a pitfall that some people make the mistake. They jump in too quickly. Anyhow, so let's take a look at what the author has for us. So the first thing to do is to imagine what your e-commerce presence looks like. Ask yourself a number of questions. What is your idea for a business? What is it you envision for the future? And that vision includes things like your mission statement. And a mission statement it really is oriented around passion. What gets you up in the morning and drives you to work on this, to want to make it happen? What is the passion in your business? A vision statement, on the other hand, is where do you see your business in the future? In the top 10 e-commerce sites worldwide, whatever your vision. And in order to get there, of course, you have to know who is your target audience. It's not sufficient to say, well, the entire world, because everyone's got access to the internet. Well, first off, not everyone has access to the internet, and not everyone can afford your product or want your product. Who is it that has both access to the technology to be able to find your product, has the resources to be able to purchase it, and has the need or desire for your product? The more you can define your target audience, the better. When I teach marketing, I encourage people to go so far as to describe what gender are they? What race are they? How tall are they? How much do they weigh? How old are they? Where do they live? Urban, suburban? What are their hobbies? What do they like to do? Start painting that mental picture of who is that ideal customer for you. It really helps when you get down to designing the website to make sure that it matches up with that person that you're trying to reach. And that also includes the intended market space. Where are you going to be promoting your markets? And doing some strategic analysis of your business. And we'll get to that in a slide here in a minute. And how are you going to market? One of the things that the mistakes that people make, and I believe I said this in an earlier lecture, they just assume that you can put stuff on the internet, you can put it on Facebook Marketplace, or whatever, and it just magically happens. So the problem is there's so many people doing this exact same thing that you're just one of many. So what marketing tools and strategies are you going to use to stand out so that you're the one that gets recognized, you're the one that gets purchased, not your competition? And then being realistic with your development. This doesn't happen overnight. So as you plan things out, build in you plan for the unplanned, those surprises that come along the way that delay things. Make sure it's realistic. Make sure that you have the resources to fund not only the actual development, but all the time that you're doing development. You're not generating a revenue. What are you living off of? Think it through. It doesn't happen overnight. And that kind of feeds into, you need to come up with a budget from day one. It needs to be a realistic budget with built-in contingencies and overruns due to inflation and all kinds of other things you have no control over. Now, the next one, I like what the authors did. They said, okay, so where's the money coming from? Do you have some investors that are willing to invest in you? Are you getting a loan from the bank, from relatives? But what's your source of that money? And with that really feeds into your business model as to the timing as to when you're going to start generating income, repaying, if you took out a small business loan, and what does the revenue model look like? What do you believe that you're going to be able to get your products or services? What's the cost going to be? How much profit will you make off of each transaction? Building a realistic expectation of how quickly can you pay back that initial investment, and does it generate enough revenue to sustain you going forward? Okay, we already talked a little bit about the target market, who they are and where they are. And like I said, understanding those demographics and lifestyles, really important to have a clear understanding of that. And I think what the authors are getting at with this, what is the ballpark, is, if you're a baseball fan, you know that the different ballparks around the country are not the same. And some, they just, the way things work better, the wind, the sun, the other things, it's different. So I think what they're getting at here is understand who your competition is, the alternative solutions that customers have. Just characterize that landscape of where you intend to have your e-commerce business reside. And then a really important thing to do, and this is important for any business. I know we covered it in BA 101 if you've taken that. This idea of doing an honest assessment of your product, your services, your company. What are your strengths? What do you bring to this marketplace that sets you apart from your competition? But then on the flip side, where are your weaknesses? Where are your shortcomings? One of them most likely is that you're new to this marketplace. So you don't have name recognition. You haven't built that loyal customer following yet. What are the opportunities that are presented here? Do you have the opportunity to address an unmet need that the rest of your competitors have not been doing? Have you figured out a way that you can do same-day delivery? Think of what Amazon's been doing that your competition isn't doing. And then lastly, what are the things you have to worry about? What are the things that could happen that would really threaten your business? Now, some of the threats, there's nothing you can do about. With the weaknesses talked about before, once you identify a weakness, you might be able to mitigate some of the issues with a weakness. But with the threats, it's not so easy to do. It's like the competition duplicating what you do. It's like a restaurant with someone coming out with the same recipe. You may or may not be able to protect your business through things like patents and copyrights, but it's important to be aware of that they're there. So here are some of the management challenges. And I like this number one. The first is, before we do anything, having that clear understanding throughout everyone that's part of the management team, which may be just you yourself, or you may have your group of investors or friends or people that are helping you. But that clear understanding of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And some of the factors to consider is just what I was saying. Who is that management team that's going to oversee the business? What are the human resources you need to make this happen? Is this something you can do on your own, or do you need someone that's going to handle shipping, or someone that's going to handle customer service? What are the human resources you need? Another key question is, are you going to be involved in the US, or are you going to do business internationally? Now, when I had my online business, because we were using Amazon, we were required by Amazon to accept international orders. I really didn't want to do international orders because of the shipping costs, because our items were fairly large and heavy. But that was a condition of doing business with Amazon using their marketplace. We had to accept international orders. Most of the international orders that we accepted, we basically broke even on. The shipping costs ate up all of the profit that we had for those items. Another thing to think about, and we'll get in a little more detail on this later in a slide, but the hosting. Where is your website going to be hosted? How are you going to handle payments? And this also reflects with the international. Are you going to accept international currency or US currency only? The design really comes down to, and the reasons it's included in here is to be thinking about the design. And the way I suggest you approach this is, if you were your customer and you had a need for a particular product and you come to this website, what would you expect to see? How would you expect to navigate and to find what you wanted? So think about that user, that customer. When they come to the website, what do they want? What would be an ideal experience for them to where they, go away feeling that was that was very efficient. I found exactly the information I needed and was able to make a decision that's great. So there's 5 steps in this, product development life cycle. The first part is the planning. And you really need to spend a lot of time here. Don't shortcut planning. This is not the kind of thing that you do, well, we'll fix that in, release 2. No, do it right from the start. And of course, feeding into that is a systems design. That's what I was talking about a minute ago, thinking about how does this need to flow and work to be effective for our customers. When I was developing a new website, I created a whole bunch of storyboards. They were taped up all over my wall in my office. And, they were just my crude sketches saying, okay, I come to the site, this is what's presented to me. And then I click on this, and then I go over to this, and then we would have our team meetings. We would come in and we would analyze the system flow and say, well, no, really what should happen is that we should take them over here first before we go there. But it was this idea of designing the system on paper before we did any coding. And then, of course, you actually build the system, which fortunately, there are some really excellent e-commerce site building tools out there that are virtually free or very low cost, and they've done all the hard work for you. You just kind of put in the parameters, this is what you want where, and it makes it really very efficient to implement the system if you have spent your time in the analysis and planning. And like I said, the storyboard design, then to actually build the system may not take that long. But this next step should take a long time. You need to test the living daylights out of this thing. What I did when I was launching a major new site at a company I worked for, I got together a group of about 25 people from within the company, and I gave them each different browsers, Mac versus Windows, whatever. And my challenge to them, and I gave them a reward if they found it, I challenged them to break the test website, to find the problems, just to, go through every possible iteration you can think of, show up where there was a problem. You want to fix the problems before you go live. Now, it's never possible to catch all of them. some of them, after it goes up, you'll get feedback from someone, you go, son of a gun. Didn't ever think anyone would do that. But, then you go in and fix it. But you want to get 99% of those issues dealt with in the testing phase. Don't be pressured to release prematurely. Hold out until you are satisfied with your testing. And then, of course, it's flip the switch and monitor the living daylights out of how it's doing. And we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can do that and tools that are available to help you monitor what's going on with your website. We talked about business objectives, listing the capabilities your site needs to have, the functionalities. Again, this is all part of the design, planning, information. Well, this is an important part. Thinking about your system, it's not just for your customers, but there are things that you want to be able to get from the website to help you make changes. For example, some statistics on which product pages are getting the most use, the most clicks going to. How much time are people spending on a particular page? Are they see the page and immediately leave and go someplace else? What products are moving more? How much time does someone spend on the website? A lot of pieces of information like that can help you make changes to the website, or changes to your products, or changes to your product pricing. Now, one thing a lot of people are tempted to do when they start up a system is say, well, I can save money. I can do this all myself. I'm pretty savvy. I know these tools. And it's really, you have to look at, is that really in your skill set? Or are there other things that your time would better be spent on in terms of marketing and developing your product? And so most of the time, I would say that outsourcing it is more efficient and more effective and the least cost, because it allows it to be done quickly or faster, and you're able to be free to work on other things for the business. Now, of course, you have to choose the right company to do the outsourcing. If you pick the wrong one, it could be a nightmare. Hosting, when it comes to that, I've known a number of people who hosted their own website with a server at their house. There's a number of problems with that. Things like backup, power outages, all kinds of things. Plus, you're focusing your time on maintaining a computer running at your house rather than just paying someone to host. The hosting fees are very reasonable in most companies now. I don't see any reason to host your own. Now, when your company gets big enough, maybe it makes sense then to bring the hosting in-house. You could save some money, but certainly when you start out, I would say definitely outsource it to a company to host it. And the nice thing I have that I like about that too is that the hosting company will make sure that your site is up. They have backup things in place so that if something goes down, it gets picked up in another location. You don't have to worry about it. Let's see. Co-location, again, I don't see the real advantage of doing that. It's possible to do that, but I just recommend using a hosting company. So I mentioned earlier how important it is to do testing. There's a couple of things to know with the testing. I already talked about the acceptance testing. That's where you create a list of criteria that your website needs to be able to do. And then you set about with a team, I would say a team of people who were not involved in the development of it. And you have them go down and do all these tasks that take them through all the things that you want the system to do, so you can say, yes, it does what we set it out to do. Now, the interesting thing with A/B testing is, let's say, well, I'll get probably the easiest way to explain it is I'll tell you how I used it. I was the web marketing manager at a nonprofit, and I had gotten some feedback from people that our donation page checkout was cumbersome to use. And in particular, the CAPTCHA that we were using was difficult for older people to comprehend and understand. And that was our donor base, you know, in understanding who it was that supported this nonprofit. The demographics were all senior citizens primarily. So I designed a new senior friendly, I guess the way I say it, version of the donation page. And then we set up with A/B testing. There's software you can get where when a user clicks on that donation page, it randomly assigns it to either the original donation page or the new donation page. And we were able to track the completion rate. And with the new senior friendly web page, it had like 10 times the completion rate as the previous one. You know, after just a week of testing, it was obvious to senior management that no, this is the right way to go. But it is a way where if you have two different ways of approaching things, or two different products, or two different price points, any number of things where you can have two of them, you can, with the tools that are out there, you can randomly assign it to go to one or the other, so you can see which one works better. I like that the authors remind us of this. Systems do break down unpredictably. Again, another reason why I don't like hosting things myself, having the hardware. I don't want to have to worry about that. When I'm contracting with someone else, it's their issue and they have to plan for it, because there is maintenance ongoing. And generally speaking, your annual maintenance costs are going to be, you know, similar to what it costs to implement it. For example, if you spent $40,000 setting up your e-commerce site on your location, you may be spending $40,000 a year just to keep that thing up and running. So again, another reason why, you know, outsourcing this usually is the best solution. Now, this idea of benchmarking is a really good idea. Back in the SWOT analysis, it was understanding who are your competitors. And then now that you know who your competitors are, come up with some benchmarks as to how you are doing compared to the competition. When you're doing that, then it allows you to analyze sales promotions that you've just run, your newsletter, other things. You can see how effective have those been, and is it working? You know, if you had an uptick in sales of 10% this month, you'd say, wow, it's really working well. But you check your competition and find that they all had upticks of 20%. Well, that's not so great. So benchmarking is a key aspect of your business, and it's not just at the startup, it's throughout the entire time you have your business. There's a lot of talk about website optimization. And one of the key things for optimizing the website is to make it really work well for your customers. And that's how quickly can you deliver that content, that information to your customer. And there's a number of things you can do. One of the things that drives me crazy, I will go to a website and it takes 10 seconds for the homepage to load because they put in all these really super high resolution graphics. But the issue is the graphics are really high resolution, but your monitor can't display the ultra high resolution. The difference between a super high resolution graphic and what a photographer or whatever would say is a low resolution graphic on your monitor, that it may be indistinguishable, but it uses up computer time. And one of the problems that is, especially if you're dealing internationally, but even just in the US, not everyone has access to high speed internet. There are people that are still stuck on dial up modem, DSL type internet connection that does not have the speed. So that becomes even worse. I have a 2 gig fiber optic network connection to my home, and there are some websites I go to that'll take 2 or 3 seconds for that homepage to load. I imagine on a slower internet connection, that might be 30 seconds. So really be careful with your graphics. They just don't need to be that high resolution. I would encourage you, any images that go on your website, scale the graphics down until you notice a degradation in the quality on the screen. And you'll be surprised at how low you can get that resolution down to. Okay, site management tools. There's a number of tools that are included. And again, this is a reason for using a hosted, for your website, because they also provide tools that will do things like verify that all the links on the page are valid. They'll show you if you have a broken link so you can fix it. Better that you find it than having frustrated customers. And it identifies if you have some parts of the website that have been disconnected. Somehow they no longer are linked anywhere. You can determine, okay, is that just old obsolete stuff that needs to go away, or did something get broken? And there's a number of software programs out there that can give you a lot of management tools for your site, in terms of summarizing the customer purchases, looking at the marketing campaign effectiveness, a lot of web page statistics. Like I said, when I was at the nonprofit, I was always, running reports on what pages were people spending time on, the most popular pages they would go to, and how long were they spending there. We were always wanting to understand what was interesting to our customers, in that case, donors. The author talks about web trends, but Google Analytics is what I use. They've got just fabulous tools to use. So I would encourage that, and they work really well. Okay, the the author mentions this thing about dynamic page generation tools, and the only reason I'm going to say this or talk about it is, this is part of, with the implementation, whoever does the website implementation will determine if they're going to use a dynamic HTML. And what it does is, instead of you creating a web page that always looks the same, it allows you to create a web page that is different based on variables coming into it. But what that means is, if you use a tool like the Wayback Machine or whatever, you can't get a picture of your website because they aren't static pages. You go to a page and say, well, it depends on all these other parameters as to what actually would have been displayed. So, you are dynamically generating that page based on certain criteria. And the way it's done is, there's all these different bits and pieces that are stored in the website database. And then those are called up to render and complete to build a web page based on those parameters. Now to the user, it looks like they clicked and a page came up. It's so fast, they don't realize that that page had to be assembled from a number of bits and pieces before it could be displayed to them. Now, the advantage is that it can really lower a lot of your costs in the setting up a menu, and it allows you to segment the market. You can have price discrimination. Let's see, there was one other I wanted to mention about that really does. Well, we'll get to it in a minute. Let's see, merchant server software. And again, this is a reason for, I'm sounding like a broken record in this lecture, for having someone else host it, because they will have the merchant server software as part of it. And the merchant service software is the interface between you as the vendor who is selling some product or service to someone, and typically they're paying for that with a credit card. You do not directly talk to the credit card. It goes through a merchant account in a different, entity, a third party. And so that's all invisible to you, because if you choose a good hosting company, they're providing that. It's already set up and it gives you everything you need. They will give you the ability to generate an online catalog that shows the products on the website, can show you the inventory on hand, the shopping cart where people to make the purchase, and like I said, to process the actual credit card. And let's see what else. Other tools. This actually goes back again to the beginning of the design, in remembering that what we want to do is to make it easier for our customers to find and buy what they need. Well, there's a number of things you get into search engine optimization. And in that case, what I really recommend, there are companies out there that their sole focus is search engine optimization. And so they spend all the time going to all the latest Google seminars talking about how Google and other search engines are ranking sites. They know all the details. Just work with them and they'll give you advice on what you can do to your website. Basically, if you come up with, let's come up with a product that we're going to be marketing. Let's say we're selling coffee cup mug holders that keep the coffee mug, or keep it hot. They're warmers that you set the coffee mug on. They will identify, and if someone does a search on coffee mug warming plate, if your company doesn't come up on the first page of results, they're never going to find you. The vast majority of people look on the first page of results and will check one or two companies on there. You don't have to be number one. It's nice when you are, but the only way you get to be number one is you have to bribe Google to put you there. I said bribe, but you can, by paying Google a fee, they will promote your rating higher than others. And you'll see that on the search results. You'll see if it shows that it's a paid placement. But they'll give you, all of the advice that you need to make sure that you get on that first page of results for the keywords that are relevant to your product or service. Other things you can do if you're buying ads and putting them on your site, that can help with your placements. There's a number of things. But again, like I said, leave that up to the experts to advise you. Now, I really like this, that the authors said, okay, let's talk about things that annoy people, customers. And I agree with these. Requiring you to watch this ad before you can even get into the website content. Actually, I would expand that, requiring you to do anything to get into the website, like register for their newsletter. I hate pop under ads in Windows. I hate ads on websites. Your website should be about your product or service. If you can't make enough money from your products or services, you shouldn't be in e-commerce. Don't view pop-up and pop under ads as a way as adding to your bottom line. That's a bad decision. The other thing is to really look, when that customer comes in, how many clicks do they have to make in order to get to that reason that they came there in the first place? You want to keep that as low as possible. And that really comes into well-designed navigation. And navigation is so important. Of course, links that don't work. That's why being hosted where you have tools that can scan your website and say, whoops, that last change you made broke a link. Confusing navigation, and I hate this when I go to a website when there's no search function. I'm not sure where they have what I'm looking for, and I don't want to go through all the menus. I just want to go through a search, show me. Provide search on your website, but also make your navigation really simple, easy to understand. And don't hide the navigation. I've been to some websites where you have to know to click on the 3 dots for boom, magically the top nav bar shows up. Just stay away from all that goofiness. I already mentioned this idea that you have to register or log in before you can get the website is really irritating. And as I talked about before, the slow loading pages, especially if you live out in a rural area and you don't have a high-speed internet. And this is really important. Content that is out of date. At a bare minimum, make sure that the copyright date on the bottom of the pages of your website are being updated. I'll go to some websites and I look at the web page and I look down at the bottom in the footer, and there it says copyright 2022. Well, that tells me that everything is not, up now, maybe up to date, and they just forgot to update the footer. But make sure you are periodically refreshing your website with new information, new products, new pictures. This one, inability to use the browser's back button. I should be able to back up. If I go down and say, oh, that isn't what I wanted, let me back up. Don't make me start all over again. And this one drives me crazy. No contact information available. Guess who is the major offender of that? Amazon.com. Go to Amazon.com and find how you can contact customer support. You will not find the phone number posted anywhere. You won't even find the online chat is hidden. I just had to do that this week. I had to search Google to find out the link to get me to an online chat. Unnecessary gimmicks. Sometimes you get web designers that are just trying to show off. They can do this really cool looking thing, but it's not doing anything to help you sell your product or service. Keep it simple, straightforward, give them what you need. Now, unless you are selling really flashy graphic displays that's promoting your product, but most of the animation that are on websites totally unnecessary. And that goes along with music or videos that play automatically. Now, if you have a video or music that you think is appropriate for a particular page, give the customer the opportunity to click on play if they want it, but don't have it start automatically. Unprofessional design elements, make sure you're working with a good graphic designer that understands your particular region. What is unprofessional in the US might be just fine in some other countries. So especially if you're doing international, you have to have someone that understands what is considered appropriate in each area. And text size that's not legible. I go to some sites where you can't hardly read anything. I have to use the zoom function on my browser to get it up to where I can read it. And other problems with color combinations. You notice these slides are basic. I don't have a lot of color and stuff on my slides because they have found that it's easiest to read a dark text on a light background. So as you're coming up with your website look, that's something to take in consideration. Most of the time you want to have a light, really easy to read background with some compatible colors, not clashing colors. And of course, typos really detract from the credibility of your website. So make sure you've got several people that look over, especially when you make a change, have multiple people look over it. It's very difficult to proof your own work. So that's just something and that's true in anything in business. And this one too, returns policy, especially with e-commerce. There's going to be times when people buy something that they go, the picture, it looked a lot bigger than it is in real, or especially with clothing, the fabric just doesn't feel right. So one of the challenge, e-commerce has a much higher return rate than a brick and mortar store because you can't see the actual product. You can't touch and feel it. So make sure you have a clear returns policy that is easy to find on the website. Okay, so in summary, we talked about things people hate. What are the 8 things that really are important in order to have a successful design? Functionality, number 1. It works. You load quickly and they get the customer to your product very efficiently. Informational. Make sure that you have the ability for customers to discover more about you and your products. Tell your story. What's your passion? Even on a product that maybe you have a product you're featuring that month. Explain why you're featuring it, what you found unique about this product. So give people the ability to dig deeper if they want to. Navigation, already talked about that, needs to be easy to understand and to follow and to use. I like this one too. There should be more than one way to get to the content that someone is looking at. So think about that too, how you can have alternate navigations so that you're not always having to go, for example, to the home page and then start your search going that way. Make it easy to buy it. That's what I found when I was working for the nonprofit. I needed to make my donor checkout form easy. Reduce the number of clicks, make it, okay, they made the decision, they're going to donate, now take their money. I talked about this before too. You need to have multi-browser functionality. Do not assume that everybody is using, Google Chrome and that they're using the most recent version of Google Chrome. When I was at the nonprofit, I had my office, I had multiple computers set up, all running different operating systems, different browsers, different versions of the browsers, so that I could test the website, any changes we made to make sure that they worked on that still worked on all versions. Talked about this, keeping the graphics simple, and any graphic images you put up need to be lower resolution, only as high as necessary, not ultra high, and making sure that the text is easy to read, especially if your demographic is, older, senior citizens that may have some vision issues. The personalization, and we're just about done with the lecture. The ability to treat people based on something. So give people the ability to personalize their website if possible. So that you could, if someone has, the cookies stored on their computer, so that instead of coming to the home page, maybe you have a customer that says, I just want to go straight to the shoes department. If you can provide a way to give users the ability to control and optimize and customize that would be great. Let's see. And cookies is how you do that. Privacy policy, really important to have on your website and make sure you follow it. The accessibility rules. This is something that's really important. Be thinking about your potential customers. What if they have a disability? Do you give them an option on the website to go to a more basic, to take away graphics or to make the font larger? What can you do to help make it easier for people with disabilities? Okay, let's talk just a little bit about the mobile platform. There's some issues in dealing with the mobile. And as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, the vast majority of people do at least their initial research on a mobile device for e-commerce. But of course, the hardware is smaller. You don't have the same processing power. You have slower speeds than desktop websites, although Wi-Fi in some areas is getting pretty good for speeds, but it's still, if they're working just off of the cell on their phone, it's maybe not as fast. And with the displays being so much smaller, you have to figure out how to do that. And are they inside, outside? Touch technology is different than mouse and keyboard. Using your finger at a touch screen is not really an efficient way to type, although I've seen some people who've gotten pretty good with moving their two thumbs around on the virtual keyboard, but it's more challenging. So just being aware of that you have to think about how easy is it to enter that information or to select that drop-down menu using a touch screen. I like this idea that the authors brought up, that when you're developing your e-commerce website, start with the mobile version first. Design it so that it works really well. It's really easy then to take the mobile version and to expand it to a website version, for a desktop computer or laptop, and add in some bells and whistles or whatever. But it's a lot harder to go with something that's been built taking advantage of all the desktop and large screen capability, and then make it work on a mobile. So make the mobile first. I can tell, when I go to websites, how good their programmer was or the platform that's hosting them. I like the responsive web design where the layout adjusts according to the device and what the screen resolution and screen size is of the device coming. That's an attribute. That's one of the things you can get from Google Analytics, It will tell you the people that have come to your site, not only what computer operating system were they using, what version was it. It'll tell you what browser were they using, what version of the browser, and they will tell you the size of the screen that they were using. So that information is there. If your website has been built correctly, it can make adjustments to how things are presented based on the screen size that is being used to view that site. And that's really what comes down to adaptive web design, where the server of your website will provide different templates or versions of your site based on the device that logs into it. That's ideally what you want. Difficult to do if you do it yourself, but if you host with a known company, it can be extremely easy. When I had my portfolio website on GoDaddy, it was all done automatically for me. You would look at the desktop computer version of my portfolio and the mobile version. They were different, but the mobile worked really well. And I didn't have to do two different designs. I just did one and then it translated to the other one. So there you go. That's chapter 4.